Hi, this is William Toti. I'm the author of the highly acclaimed book, From CO to CEO, a practical guide for transitioning from military to industry leadership. And I consult with companies on how to develop programs to improve the effectiveness of their veteran employees. During the show, we will be talking about why companies should stop saying thank you for your service and instead create meaningful programs to activate terrific veteran resources, why veterans who are used to signing up for long-term employment in the military on average last less than 2 years in their first civilian job, and how companies can do more than just hiring veterans, how they turn these wonderful assets into fiercely loyal employees who are mission-driven. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into TheDovBaron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, TheDovBaron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. TheDovBaron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to TheDovBaron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Listen, even if you're very much an anti-war individual, there's a pretty good chance that you are a pro-vet individual. You see, whatever the reason a person goes off to war, I think we'd all agree that they deserve to be treated with respect and assistance upon their return. But what happens when we give a job to somebody and we say, thank you for your service, and then end up saying, and we have to fire you? Because according to our guest today, that is actually what happens way more often than you'd like to think. We'll talk more about that in a moment. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get over to wherever you tune into our podcast from. And do us a favor, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Maybe I'll do a special shout out to you. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, I know you're curious. I am TheDovBaron. I'm your host, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Our guest today, actually for the next 2 episodes, is Captain William Toti. Now, he is U.S. Navy retired. He is the author of a new book called From CO to CEO, From Commanding Officer to CEO, a practical guide to transforming from military to industry. And he's got a rather provocative point of view. He says that we need to stop saying, thank you for your service. Why? Well, that's where we're going in the next couple of shows. We're going to really find out. Retired Navy Captain Bill Toti was the captain of a nuclear submarine, the USS Indianapolis, a commodore of submarine squadron of 3. And after leaving the Navy and joined into the world of business and industry, he spent 15 years climbing the ranks and to eventually end up as CEO of Sparton Corporation. He's author, as I said, of From CO to CEO, which is turning conventional wisdom on its head about hiring veterans. How? Well, we're going to get into that in a minute. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Bill Toti.
I have to say that's the best introduction I've ever had, Doug, so thank you very much for that.
Well, at least today.
Yeah, at least today.
At least today. It's good to have you on, mate. I'm looking forward to our convo. Listen, this idea of thank you for your service being a bit of a, we should stop saying it. And I don't think you mean that in every context, but certainly in some contexts. Tell us the origin story of how you got to that, because I'm sure there's many vets going, I don't want you to stop saying that. I'm sure there's many people thinking, really? Oh, tell us, what's the origin story of getting to that conclusion?
Yeah, I'm a vet who doesn't want you to stop saying that either. However, and this is the however, as over the course of my industry career, when I first transitioned to industry, I'd been trained on what I should think about and how I should approach my new career in my new world, right? And it turns out that I stumbled because almost everything I had been told was a lie. I'll call it that. And not an intentional lie, but the military is required by law to teach folks that are transitioning out of the military how to perform in their industry jobs. Sure. And it becomes a situation where the blind leads the blind. Over the course of 15 years of being a hiring manager myself, to the point of being CEO, I saw thousands of veterans, hired by companies like mine. They were thanked for their service, and then they were essentially thrown into the deep end and basically expected to know how to swim. When in fact, nothing prepared them for that. And that was the problem. So it occurred to me that in our zeal to make veterans feel really good about themselves, about their prior service, and about their work, that we do not do them a service, because what happens is we let them down in actual execution. And rather than thanking them, rather than saying this kind of vacuous phrase, I hesitate to call it that, but it's so easy to say and it has so little meaning. What companies can do to really impact their veterans' performance is teach them and train them and treat them in that regard, treat them pretty much like everybody else. Because the broader line you draw between your veteran employees and your non-veteran employees, the more difficult it will be for them to assimilate and transition. And that's what I mean when I say that companies should stop saying thank you for your service and instead do things that are meaningful to help that veteran transition.
That's a very good point. So let's pick that up on two places here, because on one side of it, you said legally, the military has to train people to leave the military and go out into the world. So, and are they just lying to them? Or is it that the people training you, as in the vet, who is now leaving the military to go into the business world or go into industry, that the person training you doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, meaning they've never actually been out of the military. They've not worked in that world. So they're like, it seems like this would be a good idea, right? What is it?
Yeah, every leader in industry knows that performance improves when you tie measurable performance goals that are linked to the company's, output, in essence. So the problem that government has in general, and in my situation specifically, is that the people responsible for the training are not held accountable when the training fails, the veterans that they're serving. There's no linkage. That's problem number one. So there's no incentive to improve the quality of the training. Problem number two is most of the contracts are awarded by the military services to the lowest bidder. And in order to get their bid price down and win the contract, companies that perform the training end up hiring the cheapest people they can get. And those are not going to be people who've succeeded in industry and know what they're talking about. And then, of course, problem number three is the people who are responsible in government for this training have never done it themselves either. So they don't know what good looks like. So those are three issues in series.
Know the difference, right?
Exactly.
Wow. So, all right, then I'm gonna push you hard back and say, well, why the hell aren't you getting those contracts? Because someone like you really understands that. You've been at the high level of the military. You've been at the high level of corporate, and you can see the blind spots, obviously glaringly. That's why you wrote your book. why aren't you going after those? Because surely somebody has to whack them upside the head.
Well, you'd have to fix government acquisition policy in order to avoid, because the problem is it's called low price technically acceptable is the acquisition strategy the government uses to award these contracts. And in order to get that low price, you have to hire low price brains. And I'm not ever going to hire low price brains in order to win that contract.
But at the same time, they're paying thousands of dollars for an O-ring that costs 20 cents. So how is that even working, man? I don't get it.
Now you want to solve world hunger, Dov. That goes way beyond what I'm trying to fix here.
It's a $5,000 O-ring that costs 20 cents to manufacture.
Right.
But we're not going to pay Bill and his gang full rate because we can hire some schmuck from down the road who doesn't know what the hell they're talking about to train people to go out into the world. And this is important. This is why I'm kind of agitated by this. Is because many of those people end up suiciding because they feel like they fail in the world, and you and I have talked a lot about this off camera. You know that my work talks about the need of human beings to belong. We all need a tribe.
Yes.
Right? And we've left. If you're a military person, you've had a band of brothers. You've had a band of brothers and sisters. You've got a tribe. And then you're out of your tribe, and you've been so poorly trained to go out out into the world that you think there's no place for me out of my tribe. And as a result, you have no community. You have depression. You have drug use. You have alcoholism. You have all kinds of dysfunction. Like this is, so what you're talking about, Bill, that I think is so important is this is a mental health issue as much it is as an employment issue. And there should be two budgets coming together there on that. Like, you want to cut down suicide? Let's train people so they feel bloody useful in the world.
So this is exactly the point, Dov. You've got it precisely right. The way the government goes about this is they don't treat, and again, in medical terms, you can do lifestyle changes which prevent disease, or you could wait for the disease to manifest and then cut out the cancer. The government uses the latter model when it comes to depression, suicide, failure to transition properly, things like that. They don't prepare the veterans properly to enter this new world. The veterans fail to assimilate. That increases their stress level. That increases the suicide rate. And then they try to deal with the suicidal behavior that's like cutting out the cancer. When in fact, if they had spent some money trying to improve the transition, ease and adaptability of those veterans, it might have avoided the suicidal tendencies in the first place. You're exactly right.
So they're behaving reactively to save money, which ends up costing them money because now they've got massive challenges that could have easily been avoided by spending an extra $50 on the front end. Is now an extra $500 on the back end. Of course, I'm using ridiculous numbers. It's massively different than that.
Yeah, and again, this is one of the reasons I was so motivated. So there's two ways to solve the problem. Way number one is fix the government. Who in their right mind believes we're ever going to do that? Way number two, and this may be the more effective way to do it, is help industry understand what's going on and help industry develop programs to ease the transition properly on the front end so that we don't get this, the train never, hits the wall. And, we help the veterans transition on the back end through industry, which I think is more adaptable and certainly more output focused than the government is.
Well, I think that this is the really great point about your book is that this realization that change on the front end is not going to happen. And on the back end, as a hiring entity, you can say, thank you for your service. And whatever they told you, you need to know is probably not going to serve you. So we want to serve you. We want to help you. We want to have you on board. But you got to know it's a completely different system. And we want to train you well to be not only immersed in this, but to be highly productive in this, so you feel like you have value. Because human beings need to, we need to feel like we contribute. And if we feel like we're constantly failing, that's very difficult.
Absolutely. And, the more potential or the higher probability that a person who's transitioning will run into problems, there's basically two cases. Case number one is the folks that are getting out after a few years in the military. They were junior enlisted, and they may not have developed the kind of skills that are going to help them succeed in industry just by nature of what they were doing in the military. Case number two, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is the case of people that were highly successful in the military. And they believe that those same behaviors that cause them to succeed in the military will similarly allow them to succeed in industry. It's the old, what got you here won't get you there syndrome, right? And in fact, it's not true. And some of those people that were highly successful, and I'm talking generals and admirals now, are the hardest to get to transition well into industry jobs. Now, they're less likely to be suicidal when it's all said and done. They generally have better coping mechanisms. However, we have had very famous cases of flag officers, generals, and admirals committing suicide as well. So they're not immune to these pressures, but they're less likely to succumb to these.
Do you have experience of that? Do you have experience of, is there a story that you'd like to share about, somebody coming in with that ingrained idea that, I'm a great leader?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the first things I was asked to do when I joined industry with my first company, and I was put in a leadership development program. Now, here I am, a post-served commodore. I had 6 submarines under my command. And I come into this company and they say, we're going to put you in a leadership development program. And I could have really railed against that. I could have really, got my hackles up, chip on my shoulder.
Sure.
Leadership development, I am a well-developed leader. But I didn't. For some reason, I decided to swallow my pride. And I learned from, because it turns out what the company meant when they were talking about leadership development was different than what I had in mind. But as part of that leadership development program, I was assigned the task of firing a retired 1-star general.
Oh my God.
And I said, geez, he's going to want to know why. The dude didn't work for me. This is kind of one of my leadership development tasks, assignments.
Right.
And I think
fire this senior guy.
In part, I think it was to see if I would do it, right? Because I wasn't a general myself.
No.
So the reason given was he failed to assimilate, develop, evolve his leadership skills. Right. So he was using the same, what we call in industry, command and control leadership methods that he was using on active duty. And he thought, I'm very effective in using these techniques, and you can't tell me that I need to develop a different leadership style because they've proven effective. And in fact, they were not. His crew was abandoning ship. And I developed this expression when I was talking to him. Look, General, I get it that, in fact, I didn't call him General, I called him by his first name. I get it that leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading people who can actually quit. And so his epiphany, light bulb came on, and I said, you lost, whatever it was, 10% of your workforce since you've taken over here. And that's just not sustainable. And it was directly tied in exit interviews, people point directly to your leadership style. So,
wow.
That's one example of a guy that failed to assimilate.
See, but right there, I don't know that the average military guy, that's not true. I think that even the average military guy, if you said that to him, listen, you're going to be working somewhere and people can voluntarily walk away. They can't do that in the military. And they go, yeah. but I don't know that that penny drops. You know, there's a lot of things in our lives where it's like, well, of course, and then we don't do it because we've been trained so hard into another way. And so for you to be bringing up, listen, can you lead people who can just not show up after lunch?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, like you can't, like, you know, you were talking to me about, you know, being in command of a submarine. People can't really leave.
That's right. The crew might have disagreed with one of my decisions, but there was no place for them to go. They weren't going to leave the ship, right?
No place. It's not like I'm
open the hatch. There's a lot of ocean above there. You ain't getting out. And that's one of those things that. So one of the things I say to corporate leaders is a lot of corporate leaders are reluctant to have that hard conversation with senior retired military folks because they think that, well, who am I to talk to the general, or in my case, the captain, about leadership? He probably, and maybe I'm his boss at age 42 and he's, 50, and I'm going to have that leadership and rather than have the difficult conversation, I find too many companies just say, this just isn't working out. We're going to have to let you go. This was a failed experiment. We wanted to bring a military veteran into the position. It just didn't work. We're not going to make that mistake again. So the veteran community suffers because the company thinks veterans are not adaptable enough to fill that role. And of course, the company suffers because they lost an opportunity to evolve somebody who would have been a really good leader if they had trained them properly. But they assumed they didn't need to train them on how to lead.
That's what I was just going to say, because I think that's the point that I constantly hear you make that I think is vital for us as leaders to recognize. We are assuming that because this person moved up the ranks, that they must be a great leader. And the truth is they probably are a great leader in a command and control environment.
In most cases, I also put in my book, the worst leader I've ever encountered was an active duty Army colonel. But so they're not all going to be great leaders. Some slip through the cracks. However, your point is, I was put in a leadership role at age 23, right? And continued to expand that leadership, but in a single kind of organization, right? A single environment. And it wasn't a mixed environment. And I also say to my military friends, don't lose those command and control skills, because there may come a time, and I use an active shooter example, which actually happened to one of my companies, when those command and control skills needed to be tapped into.
Absolutely.
But those occasions are going to be rare.
Yes.
And in 99% of the occasions you find yourself in, that leadership style will be counterproductive.
Yeah, and see, and this is the other thing, Bill, that I like about what you're saying is that I think that we as a society, I know this psychologically, as a society, we tend to be either or, right? So when I talk about vulnerability to somebody who's never been vulnerable, they're like, well, I'm not going to sit around and cry. I'm like, who the hell said that you have to do that?
Yeah.
Right? Just saying, I don't know. What's your thoughts is also vulnerable. Oh, okay. It's not about emotional vomit. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Right? Command and control. Is it a terrible leadership pattern? Yes, except when it's not.
Exactly.
Except when it's not. Right? If you're in a situation with me and it's looking pretty harsh, I'm going to move into command and control. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that about me, that I can move into that. Yet I'm the most, let's have a talk about it. Let me, what have I not thought about? We need both. Mm-hmm. But as you said, the dominant cannot be command and control.
So, interesting thing is, even in the military, command and control is often not the right choice of leadership styles. If anyone's studied the World War II Admiral Chester Nimitz, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, he rarely used that style. He was almost always the kind of leader who caused people to believe it was their idea, as in making in very impactful time-sensitive military decisions where lives were on the line, he still found it more effective to use a coaching kind of let's bring everybody along style. So people assume that in the military, everybody's going to be that way. No, only the ones that aren't very creative are going to be that way. They only have one tool in their tool chest.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is that that kind of a leader is also is going to be not only more collaborative, but they're going to be more like you want to serve them, right? You want to be there. What was his name again?
Chester Nimitz, Fleet Admiral. He commanded
Admiral Chester Nimitz.
Yeah, he commanded the largest fleet ever in history, the Pacific Fleet, during World War II. Yeah.
The reason I ask you is because I want people, I want them to go buy your book. I want them to read your book because I think it's important. And by the way, when I say that, I want you to read this book, not just if you're a vet, of course it will be important for you there, but if you're anybody in a leadership position, any kind of leadership position where you might hire, you need this book because you need to understand what you're actually dealing with and where the responsibility falls on you to do better instead of just saying thank you for your service and it being an empty thing and then having to say you fire them. The reason I wanted you to mention this gentleman's name is because it's important for us to know that just as we might categorize anybody in a group and say, well, that's what they are, you know what? Stay curious. Maybe they're not, right? So here's Admiral Nimitz coming at it from a very different place than one might assume, particularly at that forefront, of the Pacific. I mean, that's like massive during World War II. Right.
And in his case in particular, he was dealing with some very large personalities, MacArthur, Roosevelt, Admiral King, General Marshall. And he realized that he couldn't just butt heads with these folks, that in order to be effective, he needed to make sure that somebody was pulling everybody in the same direction, getting all the vectors aligned. And that's he was very cunning and tactful in his choice of leadership style.
What a fascinating study of leadership in and of himself, right? In a command and control situation, choosing to use a collaborative coaching model, even in an environment that is demanding of the moment. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yes.
Right? It's urgent. Right? Fascinating. This is a fascinating conversation, Bill. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We are at the end of part one of the show. We want to make sure that people get to know where they can find out more about you. We're going to be back up for part two in just one click, and you'll be able to tune in. But before you do that, I want people to be able to find out where they can find out more about you, about your organization, and, of course, about the book. So would you please fill them in?
Absolutely. I have a website, William Toti, and Toti spelled T-O-T-I. Military folks, Tango, Oscar, Tango, India. So it's williamtoti.com. And the book is available everywhere, Amazon, on Audible, whatever you want.
So williamtoti.com. Make sure you go there. William, and Toti, by the way, is double T. So T-O-T-I.
No, one T. T-O-T-I. Sorry.
Thank you. My fault.
That's the Italian soccer player. And that many people make that mistake. And I wish I was Toti.
Right. Single T. Thanks for reminding me. Okay. So T-O-T-I, William Toti. Okay. So make sure you go there, williamtoti.com. We're going to be back in just one click. Till then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you are really thanking people for their service. One click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.